In the late 1980s, Casio produced a series of keyboard called the Superdrums keyboards.
The stereo keyboard comes with PCM drum sounds.
You can identify one of these because it has the word Superdrums usually printed near the rhythm controls. Now, I think they made 5 or 6 different versions, but I have 3 of them that I'm going to compare today. The Casio MT-500 made in 1986, the MT-520 made in 1987, and the MT-205, which I think was also made in 87. Now, you may be thinking that you didn't see an MT-205, but what I actually have is the realistic Concert Mate 700 sold by Radio Shack, which was actually a rebranded Casio MT-205. So all 3 of these have a few things in common. They're all 49 keys with stereo speakers and PCM sampled drum sounds. The first thing you'll notice when you look at the MT-500 are these 4 drum pads. And since that's the main selling point of this keyboard, let me show you how these work. Each pad can be configured to produce one of 3 different sounds. So it has a total of 12 drum sounds, of which any 4 can be assigned to the pads.
It is surprising how many people will ask if you can play these little pads with real drumsticks. Now, besides the fact that you can't, I'm actually not even sure why you would want to, because they're so small I think you'd wind up hitting all over the keyboard more than you would on the actual pads, assuming you're using drumsticks.
And the manual is also very specific about this. If you take a look at the back, you'll see there are absolutely no ports or jacks of any kind, which is kind of weird, but if you look over to the left side, you'll see that the MT-500 has all of the traditional ports on the left side of the keyboard, starting with the 9-volt power jack, which, by the way, is center negative, which is an unusual polarity, and so be careful plugging in power adapters or you could easily blow something up. Next, you have stereo line outputs, standard RCA form factor. I can't tell you how important these are if you're wanting to record from a keyboard. Over here is a headphone jack, and the last thing here is a tuning knob. But what really makes this keyboard different from other keyboards is what you see on the right side. It has these 2 jacks for drum pads. This one's for drum pad A and B, and over here is C and D. These correspond exactly to the A, B, C, and D drum pads up here. So what can you plug into these? Well, you can either use electronic drumsticks or electronic drum pads. So how do these work? Well, you can plug these sticks into the 2 jacks.
So you can actually play these on any surface, or you can even play them in midair. Although admittedly, it doesn't work nearly as well as their commercial would have you believe. So each stick can play 2 different sounds. For example, this one is playing a bass drum, and if I hold the button down, I get a snare drum. But it's extremely awkward and not intuitive at all to actually play the bass drum and the snare drum on the same stick. It's no. So I think these were more of a sales gimmick than anything else. And also, since there's no way for both sticks to make the same sound, it's impossible to do like a proper drum roll because one stick's making one sound and one stick's making another one.
So let's examine the DP1 drum pads. So each unit has 2 pads and plugs into 1 jack. So this keyboard could use a total of 2 units, giving you 4 pads, corresponding to the 4 pads on the keyboard.
So in order to demonstrate these, I'm going to need a pair of real drumsticks. Now, I happen to only own 1 pair, and these have the Pantera logo on them. These were actually given to me by my second cousin, Daryl. You may know him better as Dimebag Daryl. And he gave these to me, I don't know, a year or 2 before he was murdered on stage. So I've never actually used these sticks before, particularly on a real drum, because the rim of the drum could dent them up. But it should be perfectly safe to play them on these. Here's an interesting piece of trivia. I actually played the drums in high school, but I actually always wanted to play the xylophone, but my band director did not like me and basically told me I had no musical talent, so I didn't get to play the xylophone. So these pads work tremendously better than those gimmicky electronic drumsticks, although admittedly it is a bit awkward playing the bass drum on a stick. That's just not normal, but you can get used to it though.
Also, these pads have mounting holes on the bottom, and with the proper brackets could be set up similar to an electronic drum set, like this one.
The only other real problem with these is they're not velocity sensitive, so no matter how hard or how soft, it sounds exactly the same. So we've covered the percussion aspect pretty well. Let's talk about the melodic instruments.
It has 20 different instruments, which was actually not a bad number for a keyboard made in 1986. It uses these radio style buttons, so it'll always remember what instrument you left it on.
So rather than demo all of the instruments, I've put together a little multi-track recording for you, and everything you're about to hear was recorded on the MT-500. The only thing I did was add a little bit of reverb to the drum sounds, but everything else is exactly like it comes from the keyboard. Here you go.
So moving along to the MT-520. At first glance, this keyboard looks more sophisticated than the MT-500 we just reviewed. It is in some ways, but inferior in others. The first thing you'll notice is that it has 8 drum pads instead of 4. However, these 8 drum sounds are all that it has. And if you remember, the older model actually had 12 sounds.
It doesn't even have any tom-toms, which is kind of weird. I'd happily trade a couple of the other sounds for some tom-toms.
Now on the left, you have the exact same set of ports as the other keyboard. But what's different is over here on the right-hand side. You now have 4 different input jacks for drums. This will allow you to connect 2 pads, 4 pads, or even up to 8 pads, all to a single keyboard.
So alternatively, you could use the electronic drumsticks on here as well, but with only 2 sticks, there would be no way to access all 8 sounds. However, even if you had 4 sticks, I don't think it would really do you much good.
Most people only have 2 arms, so I'm not sure how that would work unless you were a Neptunian. Now, what's interesting about this keyboard is the Superdrums controls here. So if you select a built-in rhythm, you can choose an alternate pattern for different instruments. All 3 of these keyboards can do that. But this one has one additional settings that the others don't have. You can set one drum sound to manual control. So that means the built-in rhythm will play everything but that one instrument, and you can play it manually. So, how are the melodic instruments on this keyboard? Oddly enough, the predecessor had 20 instruments, and this one has reduced that number down to 12. And honestly, with the exception of the piano, I think just about every instrument on the previous model sounded better. So here we are down to the last keyboard. I can pretty much sum up this keyboard by saying that it's virtually identical to the MT-520. It has the same 12 instruments, the same 12 drum patterns, the same 4 drum ports on the right hand side, and the same controls for changing the drum patterns. What it lacks are the small drum pads on the keyboard, and it also lacks the RCA line output jacks, having only a headphone jack for output. However, you can see looking at the original box that it did actually include the electronic drumsticks straight from the factory. So where would I place these 3 keyboards on my scale? Well, I think these keyboards go right smack in the middle of the amateur category. They include a lot of gimmicks, but they don't really have anything that would make them appeal to a pro or even a semi-pro. For example, the key mechanisms in these are entirely plastic. There are no metal hinges or leaf springs.
They have no controls for sustain or any kind of synthesizer controls. Basically no controls whatsoever for altering the sound that is produced from the keyboard other than just the built-in instruments. Alright, so out of these 3 Superdrums keyboards, which one is my favorite? Well, I think that's pretty easy. I like the Casio MT-500. Even though it only has 4 pads, it actually has more drum sounds and more melodic sounds than the other 2. So it's considerably more versatile, and this is the one I'd recommend if you're going to look for a Superdrums keyboard.
Speaking of recommendations, I get a lot of emails asking for a recommendation on a keyboard, and unfortunately most of the time those come with no background information, no information as what the person is trying to do with said keyboard, so it makes it pretty difficult for me to give a recommendation. However, the next episode is going to focus entirely on answering that very question, so stick around for that.